Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Denis Clifford. I'm the Chief Customer Officer with Virto Commerce. And it's Friday where we're recording this. Certainly it is for me, and for my other guests, it's certainly Friday, even if it's Friday morning. So we thought a nice way to round off the last couple of weeks, which has been fantastic at Virto HQ, was to have a chat about the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Digital Commerce. This is the second year that Virto Commerce has been featured in that. We're really happy about that, and why wouldn't we be? And we thought we would get some people that we really know what they're talking about and are very cool around the table to have a chat about that. So I'm delighted to be joined by Jason Greenwood, who is of Jason Greenwood Consulting and also host of the eCommerce Edge podcast, which I've had the pleasure of being on. Jason, you're welcome. We also have Jacobi Zakrzewski of Luminos Labs. Luminos Labs, he's the VP Tech Strategy and Solutions there. And we also have Alexander Siniouguine, or Sasha, as we all know him. He's the founder and CEO of Virto Commerce. You're all welcome, lads.
Thank you.
Good to be here, Denis. Thank you.
Here. Yeah,
Not
appreciate the invite.
So look, it's good to be rounding out the week with a positive chat, a positive news story, and all the rest that goes with it, in particular around the Gartner's Magic Quadrant. For those who may not know me, and I know that the three of you do, I don't particularly come from the software vendor side of the world. And I've always looked at the Gartner Magic Quadrant from the other side of the fence, which is as somebody who's looking for an e-commerce solution, either B2B or B2C. I'd like to start with you, Jason, just on that, actually. So as I understand it, the quadrant has both B2C and B2B software vendor mixed in the same thing. How should we look at that or read the report in that context? And does the report kind of help in any way to pick one out of it for each of those two pillars? What's your view on that?
I'm not going to directly answer that question, but what I will say, or I will, but just in a second, is that it's interesting that you talk about the quadrant from both sides of the fence, that being the vendor fence and the users of the software, the buyers of the software side of the fence. I've been to two massive B2B focused e-commerce conferences in the last 3 weeks. That was a B2B online in Atlanta. Jacobi and I literally got back from that yesterday. Yep. And then 2 weeks prior, I was in Scottsdale at the B2B e-commerce world event in Scottsdale. And there were over 400 attendees at each of those conferences. And not once did I hear in any of the conversations that I was part of or overheard, did I hear anybody reference analyst reports as part of their buying process or part of their buying decision. So that's the first thing. Second thing I will say is that I think that a lot of these quadrants and waves and everything else, I wouldn't say they've necessarily gone past their used by date, but by definition, it is difficult for them to bring the level of nuance that would be required for them to be valuable. And so I think that in the case of the Magic Quadrant, I think it's very difficult to get into the granular sort of detail you would need to get into to make it useful for buyers of the software, if you don't, at the very least, break it down by B2B versus D2C, B2C, and then further within that to break it down SMB to enterprise, at least at a bare minimum, because we've got all the way from platforms like Shopify, which are $29 a month at the lowest end, to B2B only or B2B heavy e-commerce platforms that are suite-based platforms that have order management, that have PIM systems, that have enterprise search, and have a 400K ACV. So how can you realistically try to place all of those meaningfully on a quadrant where you have to make the selection criteria so broad that it dilutes the value of the research you're doing? That's my initial take. When I saw this, I was just immediately, my thinking was, this is very difficult to make this relevant to the buyers that you're targeting.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Jason. Jacobi, a similar question, kind of differentiation question in the quadrant for you, but this time more from the composable versus monolithic perspective. And maybe we should broaden this out to analyst reports generally, but focusing for the moment on the Gartner's quadrant, does the report in any way help to differentiate between those two approaches? Monolithic approach to digital commerce and the more composable approach as favored by Virto Commerce, for example?
Yeah, great question. I wholeheartedly agree, Jason, with you. It's very difficult. I think some of the reports have reached maybe diminishing returns in terms of effectiveness, and it's less about almost where you're at on it and versus are you on it or not. I think because from there, a significant amount, especially in B2B, is operational nuance and realities that is very hard to capture anywhere. And then you end up slicing and dicing this so much where your sample size is so low, it doesn't even matter anymore. But I think one of the biggest pieces, and this is where I think SMB, mid-market, enterprise differentiation is really important, is there is a general misunderstanding about how to evaluate for enterprise buyers. And that is mostly from the mental model standpoint. For example, Jason, you mentioned Shopify on one spectrum. And then on the other end are different platforms, okay, that don't cost $29 a month and certainly have different capabilities. Also, though, from an enterprise side, I think a lot of organizations look at the monolith, not necessarily from an architecture perspective, but from a requirement standpoint. So you're buying off of just line item requirements, but as soon as you get into a project in discovery or whatever it is, the line item requirements start to morph and shift. And then Jane said this, but Bill needs this. And then Randy has this. And those initial requirements, once you start getting into the weeds and hands-on keyboard, they do change. They do change quite a bit. And you need something that is relatively flexible to allow you to make that change versus brick walls. Okay. So I think that's a big piece of the nuance where composability does favor the flexibility versus maybe a more inflexible platform where in B2B anyways, there's always the saying with ERPs, we should change our business process to match the ERP.
Yeah.
I understand that statement. Trust me, done ERP implementations, but also when your company is over 100 years old, they got that way 100 years, not from a Monday to a Tuesday. So you can't just flip that switch and suddenly change everyone's way of working. It's not how it operates.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the biggest piece. And the other piece, Dennis, to your original question, is you tend to get the sense that composable means you have to build everything yourself.
Yeah.
Like that. That is not the case. There are packaged business capabilities. There are out-of-the-box configuration things, plus the ability to morph and flexible and build things and extend things if you want. Just the ability to do that's really important. But you get the connotation that, oh, composable means more effort, more time, more expertise needed. Not always the case. I think that's a dangerous mindset to have in a way.
It's interesting you bring that up about composable doesn't mean you have to build everything yourself. It was a customer who came up with this about Virto Commerce and said that Virto is like the Swiss Army knife of e-commerce platforms. So it's capable of doing a hell of a lot, but there's an awful lot of things inside that tool as well at the same time. And that was a really nice way of thinking about it. And composability in general, let's be fair to our competitors as well. Sasha, turning to you for a second, I'd be interested to get you to pick up on both what Jason and Jacobi said about I'm trying to choose my words too carefully now, but let's say the efficacy of waves and quadrants and analyst reports and all the rest that goes with it. You're the founder and the CEO of a tech company in the digital commerce space. It matters, how effective the product is. It matters how well, it does, how much customers enjoy it and that they can achieve their capabilities. But, and I say this with respect to Jason and Jacobi, it still matters, at least to some people, that you're featured in these things as well anyway. How do you go about balancing that? Because I think, Jacobi, you were very nuanced when you said, once you get into the granular detail, it's really difficult. The fact that you're there is great. Anyway, back to you, Sasha. How do you approach something like that? I really want to be focused on the product, but I recognize people have to write about it too.
Yeah, the report itself, it does serve a little bit of purpose of narrowing down the field. It's very hard to pick out of 400 platforms out there. So it gives you a little bit of a focus. But I agree with Jason and Jacobi, you have to be an expert to actually get useful information from that report. There are very little tidbits of information that you can then connect of, okay, the architecture is this way, and because it's this way, it will allow me to do this and this. But they're so small. They're not nuanced. They're not explained. It's like literally 2 words. Oh yeah, hosted in Azure Cloud. Okay, what does it mean? It's only hosted there? That means, what if I want to deploy it in Chinese market? Probably cannot, because there is no such thing. Can I deploy it myself? No, because it's only there. That means if you have a requirement of, I don't know, you want to deploy in Switzerland for one of the regions, you can't have it. One of the tidbits that I noticed, for instance, about SAP, they do say, okay, we run in whatever cloud, I think AWS, and the option to run in China. But then they say, but we don't provide the option to host in South Africa. I mean, not South Africa, I think Africa, the whole, which was very surprisingly, like, why did they don't run it there? It's a very small template, but you might actually ignore it because they say, oh yeah, they have enterprise scale and they're a big company, so you don't pay attention to it. I should be able to run it anywhere, but that's something you'll miss. And there is a lot of things like that. There are some that say, oh yeah, they have 4,000 modules that you can install. It sounds great on paper, but what you need to understand is that it means it's 4,000 different companies developing modules that somehow integrate to some version of the software that you don't know if they will be able to support. How do they extend? It's a different architecture. You can't just smash it all together and hope it works. So in my view, you have to be an expert to get that kind of knowledge out of that report. There is not a lot of it there. There's not a lot of details, but there are some useful kind of tidbits. And of course, what Jason said, it goes from the smallest Shopify to enterprise packages, and they all have the same 3 bullet points for each one of them. And you obviously can't summarize the whole software, the whole platform using those 3 bullet points.
Mm-hmm. So it's a tough position to be in. It's one of these reports are in a lot of ways thankless. I think they're good for directional awareness, no doubt. Should it be the Bible or whatever you want to call it for your decision? Probably not. But Jason, I agree with you. The last 3 events we've both been at, the last 2 in particular, not a ton of conversation about the report. Kind of interesting. Okay. And that's where I think maybe diminishing returns starts to kick in a little bit. And that may be an indicator of a more informed market at this point, or maturity. I don't know, but I tend to hear less about it. Surprised at this point.
But to your point, Sasha, I think you made a very good point, which is that some of these platforms that may not have originally been on someone's radar to even consider it, the name recognition may not have been there at all, enough for them to even get a demo or go to the product page and look what it can do or anything like that. It can serve a purpose for putting especially newer platforms to the market, especially newer platforms to the North American market, for example. It can at least maybe put them on the radar of some buyers who may not, I don't know, let's say they maybe only historically in their career have ever had experience with Shopify, Magento, and BigCommerce, say, for example. Let's just pick 3. And that's the whole entire sum total of their entire career in e-commerce. And they don't even know where to start searching for something that should be on their radar but isn't. Maybe that's what the remaining value is of something like this.
Yeah, in that crowded space of AI assistance and auto-generated content, it does provide that kind of grounding to that, because we know most of that content is auto-generated. There is so much of it. There are comparison lists for everything generated every day, and you don't know who to actually trust. So there is a little bit of trust, and I don't know, it might actually be that kind of trusting source. At least here's at least some information I can rely on, at least to some point. Because if you look at the regular comparison, you don't know who wrote it or what it is about, or is it paid for, or whatever it is. Yeah.
If I wind back the clock about 10 years ago now, so I was working for the Heineken company out of Amsterdam, looking for another e-commerce platform. So Heineken at that time had deployed a fairly monolithic e-commerce stack based on existing ERPs and all the rest that goes with it. And it was neither flexible enough, fast enough to adjust and to customize, and it was quite costly from a licensing, etc. perspective. And there was a significant trawl done of e-commerce players in the market. Virto Commerce were selected around 2017 to become a second e-commerce platform of Heineken's, but was deployed initially, Sasha, only in smaller markets, and it was almost like a test and learn thing. At the time, Heineken really liked how flexible Virto Commerce was, and as I said, it was quick to develop. If you wind forward about 10 years, then now that platform, that Virto platform, is in 3 or 4 times as many markets as the original, and is probably generating more overall revenue for that company. I was in Amsterdam this week at a conference as well, actually, and it was all about, there was no talk either of analysts, maybe one small mention, but it was all about use cases and success cases, like I just outlined a minute ago. It was all about having something that was referenceable. So, to your collective opinion, it's something of a leading question, because I think I already know the answer. But these referenceable use cases where you can see your business needs already addressed by that platform or that vendor somewhere else successfully is far more important than, let's say, analyst recognition. Discuss.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it really quickly. In B2B in particular, a lot of organizations have a disposition of risk, is what I will call it. And you do not want to be the first person to try something, oftentimes, at least in B2B.
Yeah.
And I think having other businesses like yours, whether it's your direct competitors or industry peers, using a platform you're looking at is helpful because it's been done before. It's less risky. We're not sending rocket ships into space here. We're launching an e-commerce site. Okay.
Yeah.
But also don't want to lose my job. At the same time, 6 years ago, I was the VP of IT for a large distribution company, and I was told to fix the website. Okay. I didn't know what a PIM was. Like I'm a traditional IT guy. I learned very quickly what all these things were. And rest assured, I used analyst reports. I also looked at who our competition was using, because I didn't want to be the first one to try something. And frankly, some of the stuff generally starts to be commoditized. So I do think it's very helpful to talk to your folks in your personal network who have experience. And that's just as helpful from an analyst report, because folks who have done something before are often not looking at the features of functionality. They're often looking at the team operationalizing the platform long-term after launch. Okay. What skill sets do we have internally, technical and non-technical, all those other things? That is just as much of the puzzle here than features and functionality and where you can host something. It's what does the team makeup look like to actually operationalize it and sustain it long-term than just launching. So I enjoyed using my peer network to learn very quickly about what decision to make.
Very good.
I think there's also so much nuance in B2B. B2C, D2C is a little bit different in the sense that I'm fond of saying that in B2C, D2C, it's form over function 99% of the time. In B2B, it's function over form 99% of the time. And so there's this weird dichotomy in B2B where B2Bs will say, sure, I want to see use cases like mine on the platform, but then they'll turn around and say, but we're totally different than everybody else in our industry. And we use our sales process is totally different. The way we go to market is totally different. So they speak out of two sides of their mouth, right? They're saying, we want some comfort and confidence that this platform can work for our industry, but we also want to make you aware of all the nuances of our business that make us special and unique, and we're a special diamond. And therefore, can you also meet the requirements of the specialness of our business? And I think that that is the challenge we have, Jacobi, myself, you guys. The challenge we have is marrying up the nuances with capabilities of a platform, whether that be native out of the box, whether that be configurable, or whether that be customizable. And I think it's bucketizing those nuances in a way that's meaningful to the buyer that is the most important thing of all that we can do. And that's the value I think that we can bring to the table with people who don't buy software like this every day of the week. They maybe buy software like this, if they're lucky, 3 times in their career, they would have to make a buying decision around software like this. So that's the subtlety that really comes into play with these types of decisions.
I think that's a great insight. Yeah.
I think
Sasha.
whatever Jacobi says is actually, we love working with the companies that encountered those failures or implementing something else, or because the reason is because it's now we talk on the same language. The concept that we bring, they easily understand operationally, how you architecture, how design, what's important. It's not that particular feature is important that you can checkbox and turn on. There is a lot more of how you actually do it. What is the integration? How flexible it is.
Yeah.
And that's the favorite, like we connect with those companies very well. Usually, unfortunately for them, it's usually after 1 or 2 failed either product implementation or in-house, stuff like that. The challenge that we have is when we encounter someone new, they never encountered those challenges. It becomes very hard for us to explain, like, yeah, you should worry about this more than whatever the other feature. So that's the kind of the biggest challenge that we face at eCommerce for that. Another one I wanted to touch point on Jason's topic is that, B2B is different because B2C, you're shopping for pleasure, right? You browsing around, you having fun. The B2B is you accomplishing work. You have to buy this many things. You just have to get it done. That's the whole idea. And yeah, the Flash interfaces, browse, and you want to quickly do it, repeatable, reorder, something like that. It's a very different concept. It's a very simple concept if you think of it, but it changes how you design user experience interfaces, how you treat users, and everything in between them.
And the KPIs, I think, can be wrong. Sorry to interrupt, Dennis. So over the last couple of conferences, I think one of the things that I knew but was reiterated to me multiple times over the last 2 conferences is that, unfortunately, if in B2B you do not contextualize the KPIs and success factors of a project properly, it could come off as a failure internally, even if it's a success. And I'll just give you one example. So they say Deloitte came out with some global research data recently that showed that only about 9, even for businesses that have a self-service portal, maybe they've got EDI, punch out, whatever, but they've got a portal, only about 9% on average, only about 9% of B2B revenue is coming through a portalized experience today. Now, if you only measured the success of your project by saying, are we going to get to 9% of revenue or more within 12 months of launch or something like that, if that was your only success criteria, then I think you would potentially fail. It would be a failure.
Yeah.
But in B2B, there are so many other jobs to be done other than hitting the buy button and adding products to your cart in a portalized experience, that if we don't bring all of those factors into the equation, then we're probably selling ourselves short in terms of the investment we've made and how to accurately assess ROI on those investments. Because even for a customer that buys via EDI or punch out, they are still going to want to use your portal. And we've seen this borne out over and over again. They're still going to want to log into your portal and look at your catalog, check fitment scenarios. They're going to want to check MOQs. They're going to check buying increments. They're going to want to check the status of their credit account. They're going to want to lodge digital quote requests. They're going to want to lodge digital RMA requests. There's so many jobs to be done that aren't add a product to cart, check out with it in the B2B world, that if we don't bring those in as success criteria of a given project or program of work, then I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot on being able to demonstrate useful ROI to the business, even down to the fact that sometimes I've seen success factors not include the usability of the portal experience to the sales team. And I think we just sell ourselves short if we don't bring those success criteria in line with the value of the investment.
That's a key. Thank you for mentioning that. My prior life, one of my core goals was, if I can have inside sales and outside sales never have to use the ERP ever again and use our customer facing website, we're doing a good thing, because it's just as much of a culture change than it is a technical change. And when salespeople in a non-digitally onboard business are using a platform and tool that they're happy using from their phone, their tablet, wherever, as they're sitting in the customer parking lot looking up their order history without getting on the VPN, by the way, good things happen, trust me, from an adoption standpoint. And so I try to look at this magic quadrant in a way of, can I replace the front end of the ERP with this e-commerce platform and site and experience using these tools? If the answer is yes, we're making headway then, because yes, there's the outside customer facing stuff, but for a non-digitally onboard business, it's almost like you have to start internally too at the same time, because they're your force multiplier. Just launching a great website is the technical equivalent to Rome. People still have to live in Rome. Okay, you still need to have a population. Inside sales, outside sales, quotations. Okay, and especially in B2B. So I look at the platforms on the quadrant, and I envision this being their operating system. When internal people call, I have to log into the system, I want that to be the website. I want that to be the website. Same place customers use.
Yeah.
That's how I tend to look at it.
In another previous life as well, Jacobi, I was a call center manager, and call center systems. Okay, we're going back into realms of archaeology. You mentioned Rome now, so this is about 1 million years ago. And at least in my experience as an agent on the phone, which I was for a long time, those call center systems were a dreadful mess. Somebody who was really experienced had to show you around it. Okay, you have to check the stock over here. Now you have to go to this other screen over here and check the last delivery. Then you have to go back 3 or 4 screens. And I know for a fact of several examples where the Virto commerce platform is being used by call center agents and sales reps and depot managers in manufacturing and distribution companies, even though they could do all of that directly in the ERP because it's just a nicer experience. And we forget the employee experience. So I'm delighted you mentioned all of that on behalf of all call center agents all over the world. Go and talk to your team manager and ask them if we can use the portal instead of the ERP. At least that would be
And
my
trust
advice.
me, any IT manager worth their salt does not want sales reps and customer service living in the ERP. Trust me, they do not want them living in there. There's things that can get broken in ERP that are pretty business critical. And sure, you've got permissions and you have roles and you've got all those things. But the reality is that ERPs were never, ever designed to be user-friendly. That is not part of their remit. And as a result of that, not only do salespeople and customer service reps not want to be in those platforms, but trust me, the people managing those platforms don't want them in there either.
Yes. Fair point.
You know what's funny is that every company that runs a heavy ERP and things like that as their operating system, it's funny how employees always have a nickname for it. It's usually not a positive nickname, right?
Yes.
So that may be a sign.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. It's whether it's user permissioning inside the ERP or shots fired at user-based licensing for ERPs as well. Okay. This is an aspect where as your company grows, the e-commerce front end, using it as the back end for your sales folks or call center folks, support, whatever, is a good force multiplier. And it's the same place customers use. So there's a good training cross collaboration there too.
Said. I love how we started with the Gartner Magic Quadrant and we have meandered our way through all sorts of topics over the last half an hour. It's a really nice Friday chat. And I appreciate you all being here for it. Before we close, Sasha, I do want to go back to you just briefly. Notwithstanding all of the comments, it's nice to have some people say nice things about your product, etc. Over 2026, Sasha, what can we expect to see from the Virto Commerce platform, product, and company? Do you think that anybody who's listening back to this or looking back to this might be interested in? What are we going to do?
As everyone talks about AI, that's the big topic that we have, of course, inside the platform discussions. But there are different aspects of where we focus our attentions. So one of them, for instance, is developer productivity. What we provide is a platform that we develop ourselves, we extend it, we implement new features. But it's the same way our SIs or our partners, they develop it the same way. We actually, it's the same mechanism of how we extend it, how SIs extend it. So we work a lot about how do we automate it? How do we use AI tools to solve common things? How do you develop new interface? How do we actually build in some AI intelligence into our modules? So whenever a developer opens it up, it tells AI how to work with that particular modules. We're very well suited for that because the platform is very modular in itself. The AI can understand that particular. If you develop pricing, it knows to work in that just the pricing context. So you can extend it, new interfaces, new APIs, new integrations. So very easy. But we then want to be able to automate it with the tool. So if you open in Cursor or Anthropic or anything like that, there will be context for that particular AI, how to work with that. So that's one of the aspects. Another one is back-end users, especially marketplace. How do you automate their work? And there we focused on, again, we don't want a very simple, I want to generate description for that particular product. You can do it with ChatGPT. We want something where you actually have a lot of pain points, like a task that involves a lot of different items. How do we integrate the AI to that? For instance, sending RFQs. How do you process RFQs for multiple distributors at the same time? How do you manage that communication back to them? There's a lot of things that AI can actually help you. It can help you automate replies. It can flag it that you need to reply to this because distributors sent something or ask a question and things like that. How do we automate quote generation? How do you automate comparison of the quotes because they all send in different formats? How do you actually display them? Things like that. And the other one is the front end, basically users. Again, how do they find the product? There we recently launched a product called Intent Search. So that's the idea of when you put something in the text box, we actually parse it and understand what are you looking for. If you put some kind of dimensions, we understand you're looking for this dimension of the item. And we parse it and then we prepare that intent data very well structured for then go to whatever search engine you do. We're not trying to solve and be your default search engine. We prepare that data for the search engine that then you can pass to them and intelligently search for that information in that search engine. Again, I feel like it's a very powerful feature there because it's a common thing but not all search engines actually implement that. Again, I went into a lot of technical details because the product is obviously technical.
Sure.
And there is a ton of more kind of business features that we implement. And AI is one of the biggest kind of automation thing that we're working on.
I think if the four of you were up for another Friday chat sometime, I think we may have just given ourselves the topic to talk about. I spent a lot of time this week talking about it as well, and I'd love to get your opinions on it, lads, at some point. So if you're up for another Friday chat for a half an hour, let's break off AI and see where we get to. So thanks to the three of you, Jason Greenwood of Greenwood Consulting, Alexander Siniouguine, or Sasha as we know him, and Jacobi Zakrzewski. Thank you very much for joining us. And let's have a nice cup of tea next Friday, maybe. You never know. Thanks, lads.